The British government's decision to ban Palestine action and anti-terror legislation, putting a non-violent protest movement in the same legal bracket, literally, as ISIS, should absolutely terrify you. It represents a crucial landmark in Britain's descent into naked authoritarianism in of itself, in combination with other deeply disturbing developments. I'll discuss those. It shows exactly what the direction of travel is in this country, which is the criminalisation of resistance to the involvement of Britain in genocide and, more broadly, the crushing of our hard-won democratic freedoms. Let's be clear here. Palestine Action are a direct action movement. They stand in the very long, proud tradition in this country of direct action and civil disobedience, which helps secure many of the rights and freedoms we take for granted today. That's not a history we talk about or indeed celebrate as much as we should, or anywhere near it, because our rulers try to stop us doing that, because they fear we might want to emulate our ancestors' behaviour. Palestine Action are not terrorists. Prescribing them as a terrorist organisation as though they are ISIS is completely deranged behaviour. ISIS kill people. They actually behead people, and amongst other atrocities, we all know about those. Palestine Action do things like smash up machinery and arms factories in opposition to British direct involvement in genocidal extermination, as well as spraying Gaza is not for sale and Donald Trump's golf course, more lately breaking into RAF Prize Norton to spray paint 2 planes. That's what has prompted the prescription which the government is rushing through. These are activists who, unlike the terrorists rightly conjured up in your heads, are opposed to killing people. They're trying to stop people being killed. It's the exact opposite of what terrorists are understood to do. Indeed, it's the Israeli state which is perpetrating terrorism on a mass scale. State terrorism against the Palestinian people. But of course, terrorism has long been redefined to exclude the mass violence perpetrated by the West and its allies. Now, Yvette Cooper, our Home Secretary, who is a soulless political robot, said in her statement, the disgraceful attack on Prize Norton in the early hours of the morning on Friday 20th of June is the latest in a long history of unacceptable criminal action committed by Palestine Action. The UK's defence enterprise is vital to the nation's national security, and this government will not tolerate those that put that security at risk. I say Yvette Cooper, she didn't write that. One of her aides wrote that. Now, we should note, of course, the likes of the suffragettes were demonised, and they actually were far, far more militant than Palestine Action, because they killed people. They blew things up. They smashed up art galleries, but they actually bombed things. Yvette Cooper has stood up in Parliament dressed in the clothing of the suffragettes. She has literally worn the garbs of a far more extreme in terms of tactics, a movement far more extreme than Palestine Action. Those people were demonised and hated at the time. They were portrayed as terrorists. But how did history judge? How does history judge the suffragettes? And how does history judge those who persecuted them? Well, Yvette, maybe look up some history before you wear the garbs of people who actually fought against injustice at the time when it was hard, rather than when history took a different view. Let's just hear some of this guff, excellently torn apart by Zoe Gardner, who does particularly excellent work on the rights of migrants and refugees. She was on LBC alongside the former Labour MP Luciana Berger.
And Palestine Action have been involved in a sustained, aggressive, broad campaign that undermines the rule of British law and undermines Britain's national security. They've engaged in 356 direct attacks to the tune of £55 million worth of damage. And underneath our Terrorism Act, they've met all the conditions, which are very tightly laid out, which means that they are now, and have been, as we've heard from the Home Secretary earlier today, prescribed.
Zoe Gardner.
I mean, absolutely terrifying to hear that. I think we really need to take a step back from the concept of whether we agree or not with their aims and ask ourselves, is this terrorism? Is the intention of this to sow terror? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And this is not even the thin end anymore of that wedge. I think this is a serious threat to our civil liberties. I think it is quite clear, and if you would just indulge me for a second, I did make a very short list of a couple of other instances where this same type of action of attempting to disarm RAF jets has been taken in the past. In 1996, 4 women vandalised an RAF jet, preventing its travel to Indonesia for complicity in the East Timor genocide. They were found not guilty. In 2003, activists sabotaged fuel tankers to disrupt US warplanes reaching Iraq. It was Keir Starmer, who was the lawyer who defended them on the basis that they were acting for the greater good to prevent war crimes from taking place. And in 2017, 2 activists attempted to disarm Typhoon jets to prevent them reaching Saudi Arabia and to take part in war crimes in Yemen. And they were again found not guilty on the basis that they were attempting to prevent war crimes, which is the true intention, actually, of this group. It is not their intention to intimidate or to damage national security. It is their intention to prevent war crimes from taking place, which are taking place. And while we can agree that they took the matters into their own hands, they knew they were committing criminal damage, they knew they were committing vandalism, and they should be charged under those terms. The idea that they are terrorists and that I, now for expressing my support for them, could face serious terrorist charges, up to 14 years in jail, is a terrifying escalation and abuse of state power, and we should not stand for it for a second.
Well, indeed. Some crucial points made there by Zoe Gardner. Firstly, this abuse of the so-called, the term terrorism. In another life, I worked in the office of the veteran left-wing Labour MP John McDonnell. The first week I started work in his office was November 2005, when Tony Blair was trying to introduce 90 days detention. And in fact, I started on quite the week because that turned out to be the first parliamentary defeat suffered by New Labour since it came to power in 1997. Not because I turned up as much as I'd like to suggest there's a correlation there. The point made consistently in that period during New Labour's anti-terror legislation is that it would be used and abused to crack down on civil liberties when the threat of terrorism wasn't even relevant. Nobody actually thinks Palestine Action is a terrorist organisation. I mean, it's just a lie. Nobody actually thinks they're terrorists. They're being terrorism legislation is being used against them opportunistically, but no one actually thinks they're terrorists. They might say they think it. They're lying through their fucking arses. I'm sorry to swear. It's absolutely true that Palestine Action breaks the law. You might completely reasonably interject here and say, what, you're saying Palestine Action shouldn't be prosecuted for breaking the law? Look, while it's true that if I was serving on a jury personally, I would support acquitting them on the grounds they are trying to stop a much bigger crime than, say, throwing some paint at a plane. When activists take direct action, they do expect the law to come after them. That is a sacrifice they are prepared to take. It comes with a package. The argument here isn't actually the state shouldn't prosecute people who take direct action, given that does come with a territory. Look, if I was to wave my magic wand, obviously I would just get rid of the reasons for why people are taking direct action, which is that Israel is committing genocide with the direct help of the British government. As I said, I would also acquit these people. That's not the point here. The question here is Palestine Action a terrorist organisation, which should be treated as a terrorist organisation with legislation that means if I express my support for the courageous, principled, dedicated fighters for justice who are, and always will be, Palestine Action activists, I could end up being sent to prison for up to 14 years. This video I am making, in a week's time, if I made this video, I could be sent to prison for up to 14 years. Does that sound like a democracy to you? What I'm saying here, do you think it is a proportionate response that a sentence of up to 14 years should hang over my head like a sword of Damocles? Do you think that's proportionate? Do you think that's how democracies behave? That's what this prescription means. It means even expressing what is construed as support for the prescribed organisations who, in the eyes of the state, will become officially a terrorist organisation, you can be sent to prison for nearly a decade and a half. This very video. As Zoe Gardner points out, this action, which is portrayed as an outrage, isn't new. In 2003, 5 peace protesters, the Fairford Five, broke into RAF Fairford and disabled military equipment with the aim of disrupting military equipment operations in the Iraq War. Who defended these protesters? What was the lawyer's name? Keir Starmer. One of them ended up with a conditional discharge and a £250 fine for costs. Another had a curfew order for 5 months. Really mild slaps on the wrist there. 2 of them were acquitted on the grounds the jury accepted their actions were reasonable because they were trying to prevent war crimes. That was a more radical attack. As it happens, they disabled military equipment. It wasn't just red paint. And even that deeply authoritarian Labour government did not pull out the terrorism card, even though it was at the very height of the so-called war on terror, where British troops were actually directly being mobilised. And indeed, it was just a year and a half after 9/11 itself. Indeed, in the case of the Iraq War, what criminality actually matters? Disabling military equipment or war which, as the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan at the time declared was illegal? Who was the actual threat to British service personnel? The people trying to stop British service personnel being sent to be maimed or to their deaths? 179 British service personnel were killed in Iraq, completely unnecessarily. Who was the actual threat to military equipment if we're going to, sanctify property over lives, given how much of it was destroyed as a consequence of the British government's catastrophic decision to ally itself with George W. Bush's presidency in that fateful war? The Iraq War was a grave crime. The genocide in Gaza facilitated by government is an even bigger crime. And what we are talking about here is spray paint. That's what we're talking about. Meanwhile, the British government, for example, is supplying crucial components for F-35 jets, which are raining death and destruction on the people of Gaza and ripping open the skulls of newborn babies. No non-violent movement has ever been prescribed as a terrorist organisation before. Now, I'll put that in its wider terrifying context, but as the Palestine Action lawyers say, while some actions of those associated with Palestine Action have involved damage to property, activists do not advocate or intend unlawful violence against the person. A significant number of actions associated with Palestine Action have used entirely conventional campaigning methods such as marches, rallies and demos. It is an authoritarian turn and abuse of language to label them a terrorist organisation. Amen. There's a very disturbing twist. As the Guardian report, Home Office officials have briefed the idea that Palestine Action could be funded by Iran. There was absolutely no evidence for this smear whatsoever, conveniently conjured up when Iran's been brought into the picture by Israel's illegal and unprovoked war there. But the Guardian notes this comes 2 days after a pro-Israel lobby group called We Believe in Israel tweeted, "Behind Palestine Action's theatre of resistance stands a darker puppeteer, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Palestine Action is the mask. The IRGC is the face." Apologies there for the voice. I just thought it was appropriate given the ludicrous linguistic style deployed by these lunatics. The Guardian note, the only evidence it provided was saying that the IRGC's vocabulary echoes in Palestine Action slogans. It's probably stuff like, "Don't do genocide." It's just deranged. We Believe in Israel launched this campaign to ban Palestine Action, and the Guardian also report, if we're going to talk about language, guys, language from a report it published was similar to that used by Cooper in her statement. I wonder what's gone on there. Don't know why I'm doing that accent either. The former director of We Believe in Israel is Luke Akehurst, the factional fighter. He played a pivotal role in Starmer's crushing of the left before being parachuted into a seat in Durham, which he had no connection to whatsoever. We Believe in Israel was founded by BICOM, the main pro-Israel lobbying organisation in Britain, who published a journal called Fathom. This journal, amongst other things, published a piece by Giora Eiland, a former Israeli general who floated in Fathom in a piece published by that journal the permanent expulsion of Gaza's entire population. And amongst other things he wrote in that article, the people should be told they have two choices, to stay and to starve or to leave. He also proposed, amongst other things, destroying the water facilities in Gaza. Giora Eiland was an advisor to Yoav Gallant, the former Israeli defense minister, who was indicted by the International Criminal Court alongside the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, for war crimes and crimes against humanity. This piece was cited in South Africa's case of genocide against Israel. Who are the real extremists here? It is those who have been apologists for the worst possible crimes that can be committed against human beings. Every day at the moment, the Israeli army, which Britain is allied to, is mowing down starving Palestinians who are desperately trying to get food, and the British state is designating those trying to stop these crimes as terrorists who face up to 14 years in prison. We should note that earlier in this year, the police arrested dozens of entirely peaceful, non-property damaging as well, because let's not betray property damage as violence committed against humans. But, they were just conventional walking down the street pro-Palestinian protesters. After the police tried banning the protest on completely spurious grounds, the director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, Ben Jamal, and the chief steward of the march, Chris Nynam, who was violently arrested at the protest, are now being put on trial. Meanwhile, the British government won't even commit to honouring the arrest warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu issued by an international criminal court, which it's a founding member of, and they still treat his state as an ally who they are arming. The world has turned on its head. And all of this must be seen in the context of a clampdown on the right to protest. Back in May 2023, before Israel's genocide, I wrote a column headlined, "Consider the coronation arrests and witness Britain's slide towards authoritarianism." I noted the Policing Act introduced by the Tories allows for protests to be suppressed if they are deemed too noisy. Protests are almost by definition noisy. This reasoning seems beyond dispute. Now, Nigel Farage loudly demanded the prescription of the courageous anti-genocide fighters of Palestine Action in the hours before the Starmer government made its announcement. Where do you think this is heading, guys? In the US, the foundation for today's authoritarian dissent were laid by so-called Democrats and centrists who demonised pro-Palestinian activism. In this country, there's already a raft of authoritarian anti-protest laws and just general authoritarian laws. And if Nigel Farage ends up becoming Prime Minister, which is entirely plausible, he knows this authoritarianism has been legitimised by his predecessors. He just needs to build on it. This is a very dangerous moment. It's becoming increasingly clear to me that they're going to send some of us to jail. That's where this is heading. People who peacefully oppose one of the worst crimes of our age, some of us are going to go to prison. They'll try and make examples to scare everyone else into silence. Well, here's the thing. If you ask those who support prescribing Palestine Action, do you agree that if your country is helping to facilitate genocide, then you have, as a citizen, a responsibility to do anything in your power to stop that genocide from happening? What would they say? Well, they would probably say Israel isn't committing genocide, thus we reject the premise of the question. Alas, as you've probably noticed, I'm largely blacklisted these days by the British media, so I don't get to ask these questions of these people very often anymore, but they then need to be pinned down. Just answer the question as a principle. Do you think that if you are the citizen of a country facilitating genocide, that you should do anything you can to stop that crime, that particularly abominable crime? Yes or no? The only morally decent answer to that question, of course, is yes. And then they have to contend with the fact that it is the consensus of genocide scholars that Israel's committing genocide, including Israeli genocide scholars, like the Israeli-American Professor of Genocide and Holocaust Studies, Omar Bartov, like Israeli-American Associate Professor of Genocide and Holocaust Studies, Raz Sigal, like Israeli Professor of Holocaust History, Amos Goldberg, like Israeli Head of the Institute for Contemporary Jewry at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. For example, Daniel Blattman, who specialises in the history of the Holocaust, like the Israeli historian Dr. Shmuel Lederman, who also specialises in genocide studies. We could go on. What are the defenders of prescription arguing? That these genocide experts and scholars are all delusional, stupid, dishonest? That they're all inviting a massive backlash on a false whim, particularly Israeli scholars discussing their own country in that climate under a far-right government? Surely they'd have to accept that if there is a consensus of genocide scholars who believe genocide is taking place, then the view, at the very least, that Israel is committing genocide is a credible and plausible conclusion. And at the very least, there must be a hell of a lot of evidence that an absolutely heinous crime is taking place. But that offers a clue about how all this ends. You see, anyone who goes to prison for opposing genocide will know that they're being persecuted for opposing the most abominable possible crime, the genocide of a people. And they will know, however long they're incarcerated, what history will have to say about that. But the truth is, those who run this country are behaving like this because they're scared. They know a reckoning will one day come, and it is going to sweep them away like a hurricane. Their reputations are going to be destroyed, and they're going to lose their freedom. They're going to go to prison. And they're going to go to prison because this crime is simply too extreme, too documented, too confessed to, and already too opposed for them to get away with. Right now, those people are in charge, and they can repress and silence their opponents. But the clock is ticking. You are the damned, the doomed. Those who at the very least will only be remembered by history as monsters, and who face the judgment not just of the history books, but one day of the courts. And you will not have the comfort of being locked up and feeling righteous. Instead, you will be tortured in that prison cell by the horrors you inflicted, that is, if you have any conscience at all, by the screams of the children you subjected to merciless slaughter. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock. Accountability is coming. And I think deep down you know it. Please like and subscribe with your thoughts and your comments. Help us take on the pro-genocide media at patreon.com/ownjazz84. We have reached this big, huge audience across different social media platforms because of you. You help us do all that. Share the video. Listen to us on the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.